Hi, I'm Franco, and I want to add yet one more video to my series on working Intarsia in the round. This came about because someone commented to one of my videos and said, "Could you just do a simple heart?" And I thought, well, that's a really good idea. Let me do one more video and pull it all together. So this will cover all of the topics that I have covered in all of my other videos. And I may not labor some of the points as much, but you'll see me do everything, and we'll just try to make it all come together. So let's start with looking at the diagram. Here's the little heart chart that I decided to work. I created this myself on Stitch Fiddle, which is not hard to do. And as you see, there's no designation of the order of working the lines. It can be worked from right to left. It can be worked from top to bottom. But since I often do my circular knitting for my sweaters from the top down, I want to orient it so that it's ready to be worked from the top down. Well, by the way, if you're not interested in some of the topics that I'm working on, there will be an index in the description below. So you can just click on Show More and you'll see an index, and you can jump right to the parts of this video that you're most interested in. The video may get kind of long, I don't know yet, but I'll do my best to keep it as succinct as possible while still covering all of the things that I want to cover. So let's go back to the chart. The chart, it shows that the image is 15 stitches wide, and so I want to mark the 15 stitches where I want to place my chart. But first I want to prepare it for working from the top down. So I go back to Stitch Fiddle. I created a copy of this chart and I flipped it upside down because it's going to be worked from the top down. So I made two changes to the chart after I flipped it. First of all, I didn't have to flip it left to right because it was symmetrical, but if it was not a symmetrical image, I would have to also flip it horizontally. The first change I made was I changed the numbering to show that every other row starting at row 1 is a purl row and row 2 is a knit row. I always start my charts knitting a purl row, and I start here where the color change is on the right side of the image. I then color coded the chart because I wanted to be able to know exactly what to cut, which strands were going to be short strands, which strand was going to be a long strand. And by color coding, I realized I needed a new strand of background color to work this section here, and it could be quite short. It's only 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stitches, about 7 inches of yarn, but 2 6-inch tails to weave in, and I ended up with this little strand of yarn here to use for that. And then I see that I need a little larger strand over here. I didn't bother to count the stitches and calculate an accurate length. I just pulled off a strand and made sure it was about 30 or 40, 50, 60 inches long, and I knew that would be enough. These measurements don't have to be as precise as I may have implied in earlier videos. But what it did determine was which lobe is going to use the short strand, and I could tell that by pretending I was working the chart, starting on a purl row at column 2 and purling stitch number 2 and stitch number 1, go around the fabric, come back in the other side, and continuing to purl in the background color, I purl stitch number 15 and 14. I then see I need to start a strand of red. I then have to start a new strand of background color and then a second strand of red, But at this point in the color coding process, I'm not sure which one is which. Which one is the ball of yarn and which one is the thread of yarn. So then I imagine going back in the other direction, starting here and knitting across and coming in this right side on row 2, and then purling row 3, coming back around, purling across, getting to row 4. I knit across row 4, do the color changes, knit all the way around the fabric, and finally I can see which one is going to be the ball of yarn. I get to the color change at the right side of the image on row 5. I go from knitting row 4 to purling row 5 in the background color. I purl it all the way around. I pick up the yarn that was left on row 4 at this side, and I am going to purl it all the way across. And that's what determines that I'm going to use the left lobe for the ball of yarn and the right lobe for a short piece of yarn. Because the first row that goes all the way across is the purl row, which has been used for the left lobe of the heart. So that should give you a better idea of how color coding tells you where the short pieces of yarn are used and where the ball of yarn is used. So I have renumbered it and I have color coded it, and I'm ready to begin knitting. I'm going to begin by marking off the 15 stitches that represent the chart. Oh, just to be clear, even though I'm marking the edge of the chart and that's where I want to orient the image, I actually am going to reverse the direction on the first row at the first color change in the chart. So I'm actually going to knit on the row below the chart to column number 2. I'm going to do a short row turn in column 2 to begin my purl row back. This is the only time I use a short row turn in the whole process. It's a way to get the chart started without having a gap at that location where there's no yarn left over to close the gap. There's no tail that's left there. So I mentioned that in one of the other videos. So I have this little sample that I've begun. I'm going to use this circular fabric to create the heart. The chart's 15 columns wide, so I'm going to start by placing a marker at the right edge of the chart and then count 15 stitches and place the other marker. Three, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15. One more. Let's count again. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Place the second marker. That's where the chart will be worked. I am knitting the round before the chart, and I placed markers 15 stitches apart, which is where I want the chart to be worked. I keep the markers at the edges of the chart, not at the point of reversing directions, because that moves every time. And you can keep a marker at that location, but I find it complicates things a bit because you have to keep moving the marker as well as slipping a stitch or whatever to change that location. So we finish the round before the chart 2 stitches from the right edge, so that when we reverse and start purling the first round or row of the chart, we purl those 2 stitches on row 1. And I am going to create a German short row turn there. You can use another short row style if you want. The short row just makes that starting point a little tidier because there is no there will not be any threads to weave in and close up a gap that would occur there otherwise. Now I'm going to purl around to the other side of the chart. I'm going to purl all the way across here and over to there. Okay, now I've gone all the way around the loop and I'm at the other side of the chart, the other border. In the diagram, this would be the left border, and the chart tells me to knit 2 more stitches in the background color and then switch to one of the red strands, and the chart tells me the red strand to use, because I color coded it, is the one from the ball of yarn. So I'll take the ball of yarn and get the strand and start a thread there. I'm not going to do anything special to start the thread. I will tighten up the loose stitch later when I weave in an end. So I'm just going to start working it, and the chart tells me to knit 3 stitches with that strand of yarn, and then I start the small blue strand, and I purl 5 stitches. Again, there's no interlocking of those strands. There's nothing you can do except just start it and fix the looseness later. Now I'm going to start my short strand of red for the other lobe of the heart. And I've gotten all the way around to the end of round, which I can tell because that's the double stitch, and it's 2 from the edge of the chart. And so this is where I want to reverse directions and go in the other direction. To reverse directions, I'm going to do some things that I'm not going to explain well right now, because I'll be able to explain it better after I've shown you the reverse in the other direction. So right now, I'm just going to do what's necessary to be done and explain it later. Let me just say, while I'm fiddling with all of this, that it's my observation that working on a small piece like this is much more difficult than working Intarsia, say, on the front of a sweater. There's just a lot more ends that get all jangled up together, and it's hard to remember which direction you're going, and I don't know. I'll be honest, this is the second time I've made this video because the first time I kept getting confused and I didn't present it very well, and I found the entire video was just way too confusing. So I'm going to try again and make it more intelligent, I hope. So we start one stitch over and knit 5 stitches in the red. Now I'm just doing a normal Intarsia color change where I take the yarn over and pull up the new color strand. It's not that one. See what I mean? It's so small, and all the pieces of yarn are just hard to find, but eventually you get the right one and you pick it up from underneath. This is the one rule. You carry the yarn that is on the right across and on top of the yarn you're picking up, which will continue working to the right. We do that again for the next color change. And again, I'm not going to explain exactly what I'm doing here because it'll be clearer later. But I will point out that once I make the color change and continue working the round, if I get all of the extraneous yarns out of the way, either push them down through or pull them over this side, then you'll see, get all of those out of the way, you'll see that we just have a loop and a red strand that has been caught. And if we work that loop all the way around, the red strand is loose, and that yarn can be worked all the way around without trapping anything except what it's supposed to trap. So now I'll use that loop of yarn, pulling out as necessary from this end to have yarn to work with, and I will knit from here around to the other side of the chart over here. Let me stop here as I'm knitting across the back of the loop of fabric and point out that again I have taken to manage the yarns, I've taken all of the tails are hanging out the bottom, and all of the ends that are working yarns for the color blocks I have moved over to the other side. So I now have a clear way to knit across these stitches using this strand of yarn and then knitting it around to here. So that's what I'm doing now. I try to keep the yarns as untangled as possible, but mostly it's the two balls that have to be manipulated somehow, and to get it really loose, really free, like that. So I'll just continue knitting around to the other edge of the chart. When I've knitted to the end of the needle in my magic loop and I turn the work, the first thing I do is take all of those yarns and put them over to the back again. Here's my working yarn. Here's my improved method of working the magic loop, which I will put a link to the video about that. I'll put the link to that video in the description below this video. So I'm still working, knitting up to the edge of the chart. I knit the final stitch of row 2, and I've reached the end of round, which is at the color change at the right side of the chart. I'm now ready to turn and go in the other direction, except for the fact that I need to pull this yarn and get rid of that loop that I was using to work with, and it's properly locked to the red section. This round moves over one stitch, so now the end of round is at the chart marker. I think I'll just take that off because it drops off so easily anyway. And now, how do we lock these together? I'm going to begin purling in the other direction with this, but I need to find the strand of yarn that is to the right of where I'm going to be starting the yarn round. And that would be this one over here. It's not located right here because we just knitted in this direction. So it's at the far end of that red section. I'm now going to pull that yarn completely free. See, it's completely free. It's not the ball of yarn, it's the short one. I'm going to place it across the stitches that I will eventually knit with that strand. Once I come all the way around, I will pick up that strand right there and knit these stitches up to where I'm now starting the new round. But for now, it just lays across them. And notice there's no yarns in between, none, except it is a yarn that is trapped over here. I laid it across the one that I'm going to use to go back in the other direction. This is row 3, which is a purl row, and it's still one stitch away from the end of the chart. So I just begin purling around. Now, what I want you to take note of is what I've already said, because it will become really important when we reverse directions the next time where it's confusing. It's actually the same thing. It's just, you'll see why it's confusing in a minute, but let's just observe it. The yarn went from the far end of the color section that I'll be weaving or knitting on the next row. It took that yarn, stretched it across the stitches that would later be knit or purled, whichever, that will be worked with that yarn. It's stretched across those, not crossing any other fabric, any other strands of yarn, and then is laid across in the direction that the new yarn will be worked. It's laid across in that direction. So, it's laid across in the direction that it was already going as it comes across all of those stitches. That's a better way of saying it. So now I'm ready to turn the work and purl across. In order to do that, I'm going to use my improved, what I call the improved magic loop method, which moves 4 stitches to the old needle, and now there's no danger of causing stretched stitches or too tight stitches. And I just begin purling across. So I'll pick it up again when I get to the other edge of the chart. Now here I am at the edge of the chart, purling across on row 3. Row 3 does one background color and then switches to the strand of yarn that happens to be attached to the ball of yarn. Here we go. Now we purl 6 stitches. One with the short blue one. Lay that across, get the red, and look, that red is the one that's attached over there. It's locked at the other end. So we pull it out, we put this yarn across and pull it through so that now when we purl those stitches, there is nothing, no strands go in the loop once we have locked this one in place. So I can just purl across to the other side of this section. And that's the end of round. The edge marker would be one stitch over from there, the edge of chart marker. But I took it off because it kept falling off when I was trying to work all this. But I know where it is because I've worked 6 stitches. And the chart tells me I now move over one more and I'm at the outer edge of the chart. I'm now going to work these stitches back. And before I do that, I'm going to have to do the crossover of the yarn at the far edge where I'll be knitting next. Okay, we see that the section to the right of where I'm going to be knitting in that direction is the blue section that goes around the back of the loop all the way around here. It might go all the way around the back of a sweater. Goes all the way around the loop and ends here. So this is the strand of yarn we need to cross over all of the other strands. But first we need to make sure it is free to do that by pulling all the other strands across to the front. Now we can see that this strand can be worked around the back around to the front, and we'll pass over this yarn that we're going to be using, and it passes in the direction it was already going. So it's going to pass over that way. If you just did what you think is reasonable to do and you just stretched it across from here to here, you would pass it in the wrong direction. Wouldn't be a disaster, but what it would do is put an extra little loop in the locked position, and we don't want to do that. So we do the standard thing, we just follow all of the stitches around wherever they are back to the other end of that color section, which is where we're going to be knitting next. And then we pass that yarn over the working yarn we're about to use. Make sure it's all free. And we begin knitting back in the other direction. And this is on row 4. And we're going to move those to the other side. So I've got free rein to work all of these stitches without having tails and extra strands getting in the way. Again, we have one stitch in the background color and cross that one over and pick up the strand that is attached to the ball. That's it. You maybe can't see, but it's not all tangled up now. So now we knit to the edge of the chart. Now I know I've marked the edges of chart with the colors of yarn. For a while we're just going to work the red color from this stitch to that stitch back and forth while we work the bulk of the heart. So I'm not going to use that anymore. Now I'm going to move this over so I can trap it when I pick up the blue yarn, and the blue yarn is the one that is locked at the other end. Again, I'm going to get these out of the way by pulling them across to the other side. And you can see the blue yarn will go all the way around without locking in any of these other strands. The only strand that gets locked is this first one right here. Now, what I need to remember is, well, actually, this is optional. You can do it now, or it'll be clear that you should do it later. Right now, I'll do it now because it's consistent with the instructions we've given so far, and that is to pull the whole ball of yarn through that loop so that it locks in place and is not at all connected to this strand of yarn. I'll show you what happens if you forget to do that, because it's easy sometimes to not notice that it's actually supposed to come through, because that may be a very, very large loop and you can't always see where it's going. And anyway, just know you lay it across and knit, and it'll become clearer later if you should have passed the ball through something or other. I'll show that on another round, but right now I'm doing it the way that fits exactly the one rule. Now I'm just using the trapped blue yarn to knit around back to the start. And so I'll pause the video and continue at that point. Okay, so I've come all the way around. I'm approaching the right side of the chart on row 4. I turn the work around and voila, I pull that. Nothing is caught there because I did everything correctly over here at this end. Now we're ready to proceed back in the other direction. This is just going to be straight across. Here's an important point. The next row I will work is row 5, and I'll be purling that row. And row 5 is the first row that goes all the way across, and it will be worked with this strand. This one right here. This one is going to purl all the way across all of those stitches, and therefore it's the one that needs to be trapped, not this one, which was the end of the red section on the previous round. So you have to kind of look at what the next round is going to do. This doesn't come up very often, but it will get you occasionally, because you get used to thinking, oh, I just need to grab the yarn at the other end of this section. Well, it's actually the other end of the section that will be knitted next on the next round, and that's this section. So this is the yarn that will be worked all the way across all of those stitches on the next round. So I pull that one across and lock it in place. That means I am also done with these short pieces of yarn, the short red and the short blue, and I don't need these long tails hanging off here. So I'm going to cut them and shorten them up. So There is enough left to weave in, but not so much that it continues to create a mess. Those strands can now also be pushed down into the hole and got complete plate and gotten completely out of the way. And now I'm just going to be dealing with 2 strands, and that will look simpler and will be easier to see what I'm doing, even though I'm doing the same thing that I did before. So now we will just purl back around to the other side. The important thing to realize that was different here was that I pulled this yarn all the way from over here, not because it was the end of the section on the round before, but it's the end of the section on the next round that I will be working. I'll pick this up again when I get around to the other side. Okay, I've reached the other edge of my chart. That's the last stitch in the background color. The chart begins now. It begins by working this red strand all the way across the chart as it shows on row 5 in the chart. In order to do that, I drop this across. But now look, in order for it to really get across, I've got to pull the ball of yarn down through that loop between the yarn and the red yarn and the red stitches I'm going to work with it. I put the ball through that loop. That properly crosses it over and back. So it's ready to work in the other directions, in the other direction when I come back. Now simply purl these stitches all the way across. Pull out yarn as needed. I've reached the end of the round. I pull this yarn to tighten up the loop and it disappears nicely. Turn the work around. Now it might be easier to see what we're doing when we trap this yarn. It's the same thing we've done before, but there are not all these other strands in the way to make it more complicated. I'm going to be working with the red yarn and knitting across these stitches. I need to find the yarn at the far end of the next row to be knitted in that area, and that is all the way around here. So this is the yarn I'm going to cross over it, and the path that I take to get to it is the path that I will then be working that thread all along those stitches, and I bring it around as if I was working them and working those stitches, and I bring it over here, and so I cross it in that direction like that. I'm now ready to work that stitch with that locked into place. I'm going to knit all the way across. Let's stop and take a look at what we've got. If I can get the yarns to there. Now I think you can see this loop goes all the way around where it's going to be worked along these stitches here, comes around here, crosses over, and is trapped. I may have mentioned in one of my earlier videos that the hardest intarsia in the round to do is when you're working with only two colors. Why is that so hard? I'm about to show you. Every single color change involves either creating or using up a loop or both or whatever. So here we've got a loop. We're going to start using this strand to work. We're going to put this strand over that one and begin working with this strand. Now, because it goes all the way around the loop, and that may be an entire sweater, this could be a really big loop and you don't know what do you do with the ball of yarn. Which way do you drop it through? It's hard to tell. Well, if you remember, we're going to drop it between, how shall I say this? We're crossing over and we're going to bring it back to the stitches that will be worked in that direction. And you can see that to get it there, we've got to pull it up through that loop. It's still hard to see. Let me see if I can show you more of the area here so you can get a better picture of it. Here's the loop. Here's the ball of red. And in order to have this loop not cross that red as I knit, I would need to bring the ball up through the loop. But I don't always remember to do that because it's not obvious that that's what I need to do. So I'm going to not do it this time and show you how you get it corrected. We did cross it over here, so that's not easy to correct if you forget to do that. But if you forget to move the yarn through the loop or you move it in the wrong direction, you can tell how to fix it when you get all the way around to the start again. So this time I simply did not bring the ball through the loop at all. I just crossed it over and started going in the other direction. Again, I will pick this up when I get to the other side of the chart. Okay, I'm approaching the end of the blue section at the edge of the chart. I've reached my end of round and I want to close up that loop. So I go around here, I pull the strand of thread, and uh-oh, I see this strand is caught. Now, I've done this many times in this video, And every time I pulled the loop to close it up, there has been no strand running through the loop. And that's what happens because I did not pass the ball through the loop when I started this final section. So the solution is to simply do it now. I do have to make sure I don't twist things too much when I do it, but anyway, there's the loop. We pass the ball through it. Now I can pull this and it doesn't capture anything. That's the way it's supposed to work. So it's really not essential that you remember to bring the ball through the loop when you aren't sure at the far end of a very long section like that. You can always do it at the end. Just make sure you definitely trap that yarn. See, it's trapped over here. So, and this one is trapped here because of how we did it. And that's the way to do it. Now I'm going to work the rest of the heart until I get to the last 2 rounds of the chart. And then I'll come back and finish so you can see how we finish the chart. Okay, so I've just completed row 15. I've just finished knitting across these stitches using the trapped red thread. And then all I need to do to end the row is pull the loop tight and turn the work. I'm now ready to start row 16. The chart shows row 16 having 4 background stitches. There's only 3 there, so I need another background stitch on row 16. I'm going to start row 16 here, knit it in that direction, come all the way around, and end row 16 by knitting those 4 stitches in background color. And that's how that one is going to become the color it's supposed to be for row 16. So I'm going to knit with the red ball of yarn, but of course I have to first trap the yarn that is located over here. And I do that by bringing it around and bringing it across in that direction and beginning to knit. Seven stitches of red at this point. I then switch to blue. I'm going to keep these from getting wrapped around each other. It's easy to do when there are only 2 threads. So bring that across, but this is a trapped yarn. So now I'm going to get myself a little more yarn to work with here in the loop that's trapped. And I'm going to bring the red ball up through it. So when I lay it across, like it's supposed to be, there. It's laying across, and I begin knitting. You see that it's laying across like any other connection right there, and I'm going to begin knitting. As I demonstrated before, if you didn't think to bring it through, that problem can be corrected later. It's not even a problem. Just something you might do sometimes. But I did bring it through, and that means that what you see is only blue yarn going around from here, around there, to here. There's no red yarn that's going to get trapped by that as I work. This is nothing new. I've been doing it every time I've gone around. I just hope it's getting clearer. Unfortunately, the first part of this dropped a stitch. The first part of this design is the complicated part with multiple threads, and the multiple threads hide what I'm doing here on camera. And the fact that it's a small work means they're all crammed together, and that makes everything look more complicated and harder to see, which is why I have made this video now multiple times, once starting all over from the beginning, but many other restarts when it didn't seem like it was becoming any clearer. I hope it's become clear now. And we're just knitting around. My threads shouldn't have gotten that tangled up while I was doing that. They don't always. Now we're approaching the end of row 16. And as I said, row 16 goes 4 stitches beyond the side of the chart. 4 stitches in the chart area. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I just pull this and tighten it up, and it worked perfectly, see? Now we're ready to go back in the other direction. This is the easier way to see what's happening. We take the red ball of yarn, lay it over the stitches, pick up this one, begin to purl, but first we have to adjust to the right position. And this is row 17. It moves over 1. And so we start there. Now I'll pause the video until I get around to the other side again. Now here we are at the end of row 17. We're about to complete it. I mean, not quite at the end. And The chart calls for 5 background stitches after we start the edge of the chart. That was 1. This is 2, 3, 4, 5. We switch to red, which means we're going to cross that over and begin to use the looped yarn. But to complete the maneuver, we need to pass the blue yarn down through it so it can end up headed back in the right direction. And so you have to actually pass the ball of yarn through the loop. The ball of yarn's falling apart. That doesn't make things easier to see. But anyway, I think you got the idea. Now, when we begin knitting, that looks like any other color change that you do in Intarsia. Just trapped it there. We're now knitting with the red loop that was attached over here. 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to turn. We're ready to head back in the other direction, and we move 1 stitch over again. Oh, forgot the vital step. Pull the thread on the side of the ball of the yarn and close up the loop when we turn. All right. Now we're in the final stretch. I moved it over. We need to pass the other color across that. That is the blue thread that goes to the ball, and it passes over. I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way of the camera in this direction, as if it had gone all the way around the other way. Now remember, after we slipped the stitch over, this becomes the new end of round. This will be the end of this row, and that stitch will get knitted with background color, completing row 18. Yes. So we're now starting row 18, and the completion of row 18 will knit that red stitch blue. So the chart calls for 3 stitches in red. 1, 2, 3. Switch to the blue color, pull that across, and then pull the ball up through the loop that got created by pulling that across. By now, I hope it's clear why you pull that up through the loop, when the instructions are always to tell you to drop it down into the loop. It's because we did drop it down this side and then pulled it up the other side. That's part of why people get confused. But if you just remember, it's always the same. You cross that yarn over and then cross it back. And if that requires you to pull it through a loop, pull it through the loop. Now we are ready to continue around to the other side, around 18, and the chart will be completed, and we'll see what we do at that point. Well, here we are at the last row of the chart, and I'm going to change how I told you this should be done, I found out that what I was suggesting before is not the optimal way to end the chart and return to knitting in the round. And I'll show you why. We're going to knit across the end of row 18. We knit 6 stitches after the chart edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, notice the chart is complete. There are properly 3 red stitches in row 18, and they're surrounded by blue stitches. And what I've said in an earlier video that I now wish to correct is, I said if you finished on a knit row, you could just keep knitting right on across. But let me show you what happens if you do that. I'm gonna knit them, and then I'm gonna unknit them and do it correctly. Okay, now when you continue knitting in the round and you look at this heart, it looks like there are 4 red stitches in the final row across the heart. There are only supposed to be 3. That's because you pulled up the row 18 and tied it to the next row after the chart, which would be row 19 if you were using the numbers in the chart. So I'm going to suggest that we end the chart the same way we began. That is, we are going to say, just like every other row in the chart, well, I undid one too many, because that one is row 18. We are now going to reverse directions and purl around 1 round after the end of the chart. And we're going to purl that round back to here, and then do back to the last round of what would be row 19 of the chart. And then we're going to do a short row turn and go in the other direction. So that should make everything come out right. So, and for the first time, we don't have to link this red one to the blue one. We do have to tighten up the loop, of course. And we're just going to start knitting in the other direction here. The reason we don't have to link the red one is because we're not going to use red anymore. In fact, I'm going to cut it because we finished working the red in the chart. We've completed the whole chart. So that's done. So now I'm going to knit all the way around to the other side, and I'll continue the video once I get there. So we're approaching the end of round 19, though there's no number 19 in the chart. It's the next row after the chart. In the same way that we started the chart in the row below the beginning of the chart, we're going to end the chart in the row after the last row of the chart. I'm going to knit those 3 stitches, and then I'm going to do a short row turn in the next stitch. Again, I'm using German short row turn. You may prefer a different one. I'll knit around the cycle one more time and then we'll take a look at the finished product. So here is the finished charted Intarsia heart. As you see, there are 3 red stitches in the final row, just as called for in the chart. And we turn it right side up. I think it looks pretty nice. And look at the other side. How neat is that? That is Intarsia the way it is supposed to be done, even when it's flat, with neat little links all the way up and around the top and up the other side, across the bottom. It's all very neat. And once these ends are woven in and the other little holes are closed up, you have a perfect little Intarsia heart on your garment. Now, I know that this video has probably not made it look like this is really simple to do. And maybe it's not really simple, but it's really fun. And I have to say again, it is harder to do a small item like this than to do an entire sweater. I really had more trouble producing this heart than I did producing the sweater that I will be publishing the pattern for in the next issue of Cast On magazine, which is the spring 2023 issue of Cast On magazine. Let me give you a preview of what that looks like. That issue will be coming out in on February 1st, spring issue of Cast On magazine, available at tkga.org. And look at that. This is done entirely in the round. It's a sweater. The butterfly is entirely Intarsia. And I don't think I got as confused doing that as I did trying to do this little tiny wristband type thing. And it's because all of the inner workings are done normally as flat Intarsia is done. The only time you're doing anything special is when you're reversing directions, which I do all the way up the outer edge of the last color change on the right side. So once you make a color change, you've got in the more difficult direction, you've got a very large loop that goes all the way around the back of the fabric. And if you keep all of the loose ends draped over the fabric in the other direction, your work, it's almost like you're just knitting and purling with a single strand. And it's not nearly as confusing as trying to do it with a small item. I know that's not intuitive, that it would be that much better, but that's what I've found. And so don't be discouraged if you try something small and think this is just too hard. This is not too hard. This is really wonderful, and it is so much fun to knit. So I hope some of you will try it or enjoy other magnificent Intarsia patterns on your sweaters, because not many people are doing that these days, it seems. Well, thank you for watching this series on Intarsia-in-the-round. Please come and join us at franco.com, which is spelled unusually as you see on the screen, At franco.com, you can enter your own measurements and the gauge of the yarn and needles that you choose to use, and choose the type of collar you want on a sweater, and it will generate a sweater pattern for you that just fits you, your custom size according to your measurements. It's really quite an exciting thing to do. The entire pattern is knitted top down. It has no seams whatsoever. There are places you pick up stitches, but no place are you seaming. And it has the architecture, surprisingly, the architecture of set-in sleeves, which people say are fitting them perfectly. It's getting rave reviews by the people who are using the pattern, and I invite you to come and enjoy it as well. Happy knitting.